Hi, everyone. Thank you for tuning in to The Social Mind. Today, we're talking about love, relationships, sex, and taboo. And this is a part one of a series on the topic about love, relationships, sex, and taboo. And now, many people confuse love, commitment, and sex or assume they go hand in hand. Having sex in a committed relationship can make people feel closer and more loving. Having sex in a non committed relationship can also be lots of fun and can make people feel, I guess, better like friends. Now, when entering a new relationship and throughout the course of that relationship, friendly or romantic, sexual or non sexual, monogamous or non monogamous, that's up to the individual. However, in 2023, sex is still a taboo topic. So, how do we overcome this ideology? Sex is seen as something that is inappropriate due to society's structural, cultural norms and values, mores. Sex should never be talked about in front of anybody, particularly as it's a private act where two people share compassion. And many cultures, Grenada included, do not allow for open discussion or depiction of sexual activities or sexual acts. Now, studies show that sex reminds man of their primitive animalistic behaviors. Thus, such core animal nature threatens the very existence of moral values. Romance and love, on the other hand, decorate sex, but it is rather something to be done in private between two consensual adults and not in groups. Today I have with me clinical sexologist Kerlin Charles, and we're going to have a conversation about love, relationship, sex, and taboo. Kerlin, welcome to The Social Mind, and thank you for tuning in, guys. Kerlin, before we get started, is there anything that you want to, I suppose, share with the audience? Tell us a little about yourself before we begin our conversation.
Okay. Hi. Thank you for having me, Lana Dale. It's a pleasure to be here. So, as you said, my name is Kerlin Charles. I am a clinical sexologist. My background also is in psychology, and I guess as much I have started in the field of HIV, sexual and reproductive health, and I guess we'll talk a little about that during our discussion. But for now, I am Kerlin Charles, clinical sexologist. Thank you for having me.
You're welcome, and thanks for being here. I know that you wear many hats. Today, you're a sexologist. So, Kerlin, tell us, what is a sexologist?
Right. So, sexology is a new field. And a lot of people, when they hear the term, they're like, okay, is there something that really call a field of sexology? Yes. So it is an interdisciplinary scientific study of human sexuality, so including sexual behavior, interest, and function. So when you talk about sexologists, we specialize in human sexuality and the intersectionality of sex, environment, past traumas, learned behaviors, and other relationship factors. We, as clinical sexologists, we facilitate clients' sexual and reproductive growth by helping them identify their sexual goals, by offering education, resources, tools, and techniques to help them meet those goals that they set, and hopefully, ultimately, to manage their own sexual and reproductive growth. In a nutshell.
Okay, but Kerlin, I know you. Like I said, I know you wear many hats. What made you become a clinical sexologist? I mean, like you say, it's a new field, and here we are. I don't know any other sexologists in Grenada, so I'm thinking that you're the first. Correct me if I'm wrong, right? So you're the first clinical sexologist. What made you go into that direction?
Well, I've been working in the field of HIV for a very long time. When you talk about HIV and sexual reproductive health, you're talking about sex, right? You must discuss sex. And so that interest peaked when I started facilitating sessions, educating person about HIV, educating person about condom use, and so on, safe practices. And I remember when I was in high school, my wish was to always provide a safe space for people wanting to talk about a relationship. So I had this little corner that I set up in the auditorium of that secondary school. And I used to ask my friends and them to just come, let's chat about relationship. I mean, I didn't know much at that time, but I read a lot about relationship and so on, and I gave little advice where I could. And so when I started my undergrad in psychology, um, someone, I can't remember who, I think was a teacher or so, tell me, you always talking about sex, you're always so open about sex. Maybe you should look into a field. I'm not sure if it's you, but look into the field. I think it was you. Look into the
I
field
think it's me.
of sex. And I said, yeah, but I'm not sure there's a field. And I start digging into it and so on. And I think when I took a class with Royette, she's in Trinidad, she mentioned that to me. And she said, there's a school called Loveology. And so I looked up and I found it and I did a basic certificate in love, relationship, and sex. And then after that, I was like, okay, this is the field I wanted to. So I moved on into clinical sexology, and here I am.
Lovely. I mean, this idea of like you could go to somebody to talk about your, I guess, intimacy, relationships, whatever it is. That's what we do with our peers, our girlfriends or our circle. But when the one consults a sexologist, I mean, what role do you play in facilitating that discussion, that conversation? When do we seek a sexologist?
When do we see? So someone who has concerns about the relationship, they have concern about their sex life, intimacy, pleasure, dating, the whole spectrum when it comes to relationship. And whether it's couple or you're married, not married, an individual just needing that kind of guidance, you can seek the assistance of a sexologist. Our field is wide, and you'll hear me using the word concern and not issues when I'm talking about sex, because for me, issues come with a negative connotation, and I rather say concern because people are concerned about certain aspects of the relationship. So,
Absolutely.
if, for example, if you're a man and you have experiencing erectile dysfunction, low or no sexual desire, early ejaculation, dating skills, you need to enhance your pleasure, then you seek out a sexologist. If you're a woman and you have the same thing, low or no sexual desire, pre-orgasmic, primary and secondary, and primary meaning that you cannot reach an orgasm by yourself or with your partner, and pre-orgasmic secondary, meaning that you can reach an orgasm by yourself but not with a partner. And so everyone wants to reach that stage because that's a beautiful, beautiful process. And so persons would come and we would chat about that. I would provide techniques and tools and resources for them to be able to reach that goal. Sexual inhibition, person who have painful sex and they want to get out of that, body dysphoria, persons in menopause and want to navigate through their menopause in terms of their sex lives. All of those things you come to a sexologist, and we try our best to help you navigate through that process as safely as possible.
And I'm gonna always use Grenada as my case study. It's where I know best. Yes, I may live outside in other spaces, but that's the space I grew up in. And the issue or the idea or the topic, the word is sex. And we could just be talking male or female, not intimacy, not sexual intercourse, just the word sex.
Mm-hmm.
When an older person hears that, that's you're automatically branded as being rude or something. So why does talking about sex, pleasure, intimacy appears to be very shameful or tabooed by our older generation? I'm seeing a shift with the younger generation. They are more open and more expressive. But the older generation, the people who has that information and supposed to pass it on to us in particular ways, why is it so taboo to use those words? Or if you having problems, let's say in your, well, if you have concerns, sorry,
Yes.
not problems or issues. If you have concerns, for example, in your relationship, and you might want to talk to an older man or older woman about it, sometimes those conversations are really difficult to have. You might genuinely be seeking help, but they don't want to discuss it with you. They tell you to go home and talk to your husband, or go home and talk to your wife or your boyfriend, instead of really giving you that idea. So I'm happy to know that there's a clinical psychologist on island. You might get a lot of work now, I call it. So should I say what the office is? But there's a space where one could really discuss that, and a safe, and then knowing that there's a safe space. So even if you're outside of Grenada, that's a profession, that's a field that is out there to help persons who have concerns about sex, intimacy, or even relationship matters. I'm going back to the question: why does talking about sex, pleasure, and intimacy in a Caribbean context appears to be so shameful or taboo by our older generation?
And you touch on it in your introduction, right? So I'll try to go back to that. But historically, sex has always been a taboo, because of our culture, because of the fact that we are a religious country, and that is in quotation mark. Right? And it's also because sex reminds us of our basic animalistic nature. And I think you said that in your beginning, right? So we as humans, we generally think of ourselves as we evolve, or we are spiritual being, we are religious, and we do not, and that's not part of the conversation, right? Because sex, when we started, sex back in the 90s, the 60s, the 70s, were mainly for procreation. It was not meant for pleasure. Pleasure was only for the man and not for the woman. And so, as the years gone by, we attach shame and guilt in such experience. And so, when you think about shame and guilt, you think about you not, as Grenadian would put it, I wish the ground would open up and let me in, right? Because this is something that you do not want to experience. Shame is an emotion that nobody likes. And so a lot of the older generation, there was so much shame and guilt around sex. It is difficult for them now to even have the conversation with the younger people about it. And it also threatens our moral fabric of our society, right? Because we always want to think about our morality when we talk about our society and about sex and so on. So we have this, we put a nice, pretty blanket over it. So we call it romance. And we decorate sex with romance. And so it's easier to talk about romance, and it's easier to talk about love and so on, instead of talking about sex, because sex for us should be between two people, and not just any two people. It should be between two married individuals, right? Mm-hmm. So if you're unmarried, you're not supposed to have sex. If you're unmarried, you're not supposed to be talking about sex. And I don't know if you had that experience, but when I was growing up, sex was always in the dark. People always take off the lights to have sex. So if you're taking off the light, that means it is something you should be ashamed of, because sex is such a beautiful thing. I can't for the life of me understand why you will have it in the dark, right? And that brought up a lot of issues, because sex was happening in dark places. You have women who never look at their genitals, women who are afraid to look at it. They don't understand the dynamics of their the genitals, if we go back to looking at children, you have boys would play with their penises, right? And it's fine. Nobody beat them, nobody do anything about it with them. Oh, he's curious, he always pulling on that. But the
Yeah.
minute time a young woman, a young girl, start playing with her vulva, then it's an issue. You get a slap on your hand that says, no, don't do that. That's dirty, that's unclean, right? And so women grew up with this sort of shame and guilt around touching their genitals. And so that's why it's now so difficult for some women to even think about masturbation, because that is taking your hands and putting there. And if you have been beating my hands for so many times, it's just like a child touching the stove and you tell the child, no, you're not supposed to do that, right? And this is a discussion I think we should have further on, because there's so much taboo around masturbation and sex and so. But what is coming from that and understanding that we have this taboo in place right now, as you say, young people are now more open to talking about sex and so on. But sometimes it's the manner in which you talk about sex, because it's almost like this dirty thing, this I can't find the word right now, but we do not talk about it as if it's a beautiful thing. Sex is a beautiful thing, and I think we need to start changing our language around sex. And the key to making sex less taboo is by embracing and exploring our own sexuality. So, for example, thinking about how you feel about your own body and developing the language that describes how we feel beyond just it being good or it being bad or it being dirty or it being sinful or it being shameful, right? And when we start changing our language, and still going back, I really want to go back to just the penis and the vulva, because we had a session with men and boys this weekend, and describing the genital organs, all the words that we use was comfortable to them. So like dick and so on was good, was okay for them to say. But when it comes to using penis and vulva, I mean, most of us say vagina, but the outside is your vulva and not your vagina. Your vagina is the inside. It was a set of giggles for the boys just to use the word penis, but they could have used all the other derogative term with ease. And so we have to get our young people to start using the beautiful words that describe our genitals. I know I say a lot, so.
But I want to go back. Three points. I hope I remember them. One of which you mentioned, that of I guess culture or being a religious society, and that animalistic aspect of how if we talk about sex, that's what it's sort of created in our minds. First of all, it's a natural thing. Secondly, culture is what have us thinking the way that we are thinking about sex and sexuality or intimacy. One of the points that you made about children, in terms of the male boys and girls, and the boys are able to express, again, when the body is going through, now I'm not no biologist, right? I didn't study anatomy, but when the body, from the research I've done, when the body is going through particular phases or changes, it starts at 2 and 3 years, 3 and 4 years old in both sexes, boys and girls. So when a young girl or young child is exploring their body, we need to get to the point, I suppose, of talking to them, talking to the girls, and then that's how you grow to know and understand your bodies. If you do not explore, then there's no way that you're going to learn. And I suppose it goes back to the conversation that you said you were having with the guys and calling their penises all these derogatory names, right? Because again, our society perpetuates those type of names. We say dick, we say cock, we say cat we talking about the female genitals, and so we become more comfortable. And when children are younger, we do not tell them what it is. We call it all kind of names. Cake. Well, when I was growing up, it was called cake. it was called cake. For the boys, I think it was between piggy and toti, I suppose.
Right.
When I think of childhood, it had nothing to do with penis. And when you spoke about your penis or your vagina, you were being rude. So if they tell you
exactly.
when they're starting to shower, I mean, you're being rude for saying the correct thing. So society is sometimes, I guess, the moral high ground is not always correct, and we need to be, I suppose, more open and do some introspection. And if we're going to be teaching biology and so on at school, yes, everything is age appropriate. But when a young boy or young girl is exploring their bodies, as parents, get to the stage where you can have a conversation or discussion with your children. So I think those three things stood out, because that's why I suppose when a female gets older, he or she may not know how to have an orgasm. A male may not know how to. Well, probably a male would always have one, but in terms of from a female standpoint, you don't know what makes you tick. In essence, because you have not explored that. And as you rightfully said, sex in the past was really for male enjoyment and procreation. But it's something that, as you rightfully said, is much more beautiful, more pleasurable, and more enjoyable, that both parties, both sexes can really get engaged in. So I just think I wanted to plug that in, because particularly when we teach and we have this discussion in the classroom, there's a lot of adults that they don't know. The truth is, they don't know these things. And so, as you rightly said, these are conversations that we really need to have, and really stop being hypocritical about it. Because everybody's engaged, whether we are Christian society or not, at some point.
Right. Yeah. And if you don't know, are you open enough to want to learn about these things? As parents, you need to start having those age-appropriate conversations with your child. And if you do not know, then find somewhere to learn about it. Find sessions that people are having out there, conversations, and not just from your peers, because sometimes your peers give you the wrong information, even as adults, because we only give the information that we have. And so you need to start having getting those information so that you can sit with your child and have those conversations before someone else does, before social media does, before the porn industry does. Right? And during all these false sense of sex into your home. And that's a whole other conversation for us to have.
Conversation. I know. So you're preempting my next question. What ideologies do you think are most damaging towards our sense of positive sexuality?
Well, when I think about that, let's get back a bit and talk about what is positive, what is sex positivity. Because now we have what we call sex positivity and sex negativity. And sex positivity is really talking about really the idea that people should have a space to embody it and explore and learn about their bodies without judgment and without shame. So it involves that sort of non-judgmental and respectful way of regarding diversity in terms of your sexuality, in terms of your gender expression, as long as there is consent, right? And as long as it's age appropriate. Again, back to age appropriate. So sex positivity is not telling you just about having sex, but it's also allowing people to have sex with whomever they want, wherever they want. Of course, once there is consent. But when you talk about negativity and you talk about the damaging towards sex, the sexuality, we are so ingrained. It's so ingrained in our society the way we operate as a society when it comes to sex. It's almost like we have to shame and we have to police people's body. And shame and guilt become the caveat for talking, for shaming people into sex. So hence the reason we don't talk about sex in our home. We don't talk about sex in our schools. We slut shame people. We engage in victim blaming because all these are that negative space when it comes to sex. So sex negativity is really approaching your sex and sexuality from a place of fear, from a place of oppression, and from a place of stigma. And just going back to what I was speaking about earlier in terms of the genitals and women and girls touching their genitals and being shamed or putting the fear of God into you that you do not touch or explore your body. That is all part of sex negativity, and we really need to move out or remove the shame and judgment around sex, intimacy, and pleasure, because as I said, it's a beautiful thing, and we are going to have it someday. We are going to experience it someday. And what's the sense not speaking about it when someone is going to experience it? And isn't it better that I experience it from a place of knowing, a place of education, a place of comfort, a safe space, and being able to experience that and experience my relationship with grace?
I suppose we hire someone to teach us how to drive. If we want to learn to bake a cake, there are things that they need to tell us. So we need to have that conversation like we have every other conversation that is a life tool, a life skill. We should get to the point that understanding that females are not just for procreation anymore. Yes, that has been culturally ingrained with us. That's historically, from a woman's perspective, that is what we were seen as, sexual objects. For men's pleasure, that thinking is a long out the door, one would argue. And so we really need to have those conversations in our homes, in our churches, in our schools. And like everything else, it has to be done in moderation. The truth is, while we say we are a Christian society, one can argue outside of that Christian society, it's happening anyway. So are we going to be hypocritical about it, where people don't explore their bodies and you don't call the genitals by its proper name, and children are sometimes exploited because they might come and tell you, oh, this person touched my cake, whatever that was, whatever that means, and you're not paying attention to it because you're touching the child inappropriately, but you're not using the right words. That person might use a different word. And so the child might think it's okay. But if you have conversation of the do's and don'ts quite early, I'm thinking that is a place where we can start and really have much broader and deeper discussion or conversation about sex, about relationships, about intimacy. And one of the key things that you mentioned is about consensual. Yeah. And we all know that children cannot give. We all know that children, for example, cannot have those type of discussions. But if we don't talk to them very openly about it, then we are kind of setting them up for the exploitation, the sexual exploitation of what sometimes takes place. A lot of persons are being raped, and then if you don't know how to deal with those issues, then we end up in a much bigger problem. But again, that's a different conversation. But these things happen. One of the things that we sometimes, well, in the Grenadian context, as far as I know, sex toys are banned in Grenada. Now, as a sexologist, how can we address that, I suppose, idea holistically as a society? Because we all know that sex toys can be used for multiple things and by different groups of people within our society. That's something we don't think about.
Yeah, yeah. And I'm not 100% sure as it relates to what sex toys are banned, but from my from my knowledge, and I really have to go back to review the immigration laws, and so I think it phrased a frame around the toy that resembled the phallic of a male, right? Um, but outside of that, we have this negative connotation when we talk about sex toys. Um, and some men in particular um, are very fearful when it comes to sex toys because for them is, oh, this is something that would replace me. But let's flip that. A sex toy is not there to replace you because a sex toy can only do so much. Um,
Right.
Women still need that type of intimacy. Um, Not women, women and men still need that type of intimacy. They still need that type of connection. And those are things that a toy cannot really give you. A toy gives you the sexual pleasure. Um, and what I tell my clients is that you incorporate it, but you also have the conversation around it first. You don't just bring a sex toy into your bedroom. Um,
Right.
with everything, you have to have that conversation to see the level of comfort for both parties. If he has concern about it, then how can we address those concerns? Um, if the female partner has concern about it, how can we address those concerns? If someone and sex toys is not only for able-bodied people, but persons who are differently abled can use sex toy. And I think we sometimes forget that they too are sexual beings. And so even as parents growing up, someone who are differently able, how are you providing that type of information for that person? And as you said, you, that type of information prevents you from sometimes from being raped or being in this um, sexual situation that you have no control over, you have no power. But if you provide that type of information for them, they're able to navigate around that, they're able to have conversation around that, they're able to say no, yes, I give consent, I don't give consent. And so going back to bringing back sex into the bedroom is that you have those type of conversation with each other and slowly bring it inside in your sexual relationship. And I have clients that say to me, "Oh well, it's interesting because now the men are seeing it from, okay, this is also assisting me to help my lady, to help my partner to experience pleasure that she has never experienced before,
Right.
right? Because growing up, we weren't taught how to pleasure each other. And so that's a conversation that persons in relationship need to have. How can we explore pleasure? And exploring pleasure for each couple different. It differs. What I would experience and call pleasure in my relationship, it might be different from you. So you cannot take what your peer saying on the block or peer saying in whatever room you are in, um, and take that and bring it into your relationship because it might not work. So
Right.
when you hear people talking about what they experience. Yes, you can be curious, but you also have to have that conversation with your partner as to see whether you, in your relationship, if that's something that you can bring into it.
Absolutely. One of the things I remember when I was doing the session with Dr. Martin, he said that oftentimes women place a lot of pressure on men because he was alluding to the fact, women doesn't have to do a lot of work, but we put a pressure on the man. I think men put pressure on themselves because they feel
We
they can
both
be
put
going
pressure
and
on
going
ourselves.
and going,
Yes.
going. And sometimes a key thing that he would have alluded to is that of not taking care of our bodies in terms of eating properly and so on.
Yeah.
So and one of the things that you would have pointed out a while ago is that sometimes men see, I suppose, using sex toys as replacing them, not understanding that it can really enhance the pleasure in the bedroom for both parties. And then maybe you're not going to have that ultimate pressure that sometimes that comes with sex and intimacy. So before we I suppose we wrap up, is there anything that you want to add to our conversation about our subject matter?
Yes. Going back to the conversation with Dr. Martin about women place pressure on men. I think both parties place pressure on themselves. If you do not have that connection outside of the bedroom, and for play, connection, and so start way outside of the bedroom. It's not just in the bedroom. It's having those conversations. It's sending the text messages. It's hiding those little notes. It's the little flowers. It's those little thoughts that comes and prepare you for when you reach in the bedroom. But
Colin,
we also have the pressure of. We also have the pressure of.
Muddy waters.
But we also have the pressure that we put on ourselves. For women, we put on ourselves the pressure in terms of how we look and how we look while we are having sex, and what does he think about my dress and my tummy and my so. And if you ask the men, there's no pressure, but we put it on ourselves.
They're not taking this. That's true.
No.
That's true.
They would not have sex with you, right? Most of the time. And men put also pressure on themselves because they feel they have to be pressured into performing and being the best performer out there. And also, it's also about the penis and the penis size and so on. So there are pressures on both sides, and we do put pressure on ourselves, but we also put pressure on each other. The men want to outperform the last partner that you have. You want to outperform the last partner that he has. And all of these dynamics that should have no play in the relationship that you have now. You take those past experiences and bring into that experience. And so you have a lot of anxiety, and both male and female have anxiety when they're having sexual intercourse. If you don't have those type of conversation outside of the bedroom or preparation, because sex is not just penis and vagina or penis and mouth or penis and anus. It's much more than that, and it starts with those nice communication that we should be engaging in before.
Absolutely. For some persons, like you rightfully said, sex does not start in the bedroom. It starts in the mind. So it starts throughout the day, as a matter of fact, while you're at work. Yeah. And as you rightfully said, those text messages, it's a build-up. And one of the things that I would have had conversation with some guys, foreplay is not part of it, actually. They just want to get into it. But if you have to learn your partner and understand your partner and bring them that pleasure, it starts most times in the mind, and it's not really a physical or visual thing sometimes. Yes, as you rightfully said, those little things that adds up, the build up before the actual, I suppose, the actual activity, then it's also key. Yeah.
Yeah. But I just want to touch on one thing before we go. When we talk about anxiety, and I guess we can address that in a different forum. But when we talk about anxiety, especially with the female and also with the male, let's not only body parts, but if you do not have food to put on the table, if you have issues putting food in your children's tummy, if you have issues at work, if you have issues within the concerns within the relationship, if you have those, how can you expect to perform at your best in the bedroom? Because all these things will be playing in your mind. So when we're talking about sex, we're talking about relationship, we're talking about that type of intimacy, that type of a connection that we should have with each other, inside the bedroom, outside the bedroom, at your workplace, everywhere with each other.
Absolutely, you're right. And sometimes your mind not in the space, but because your partner probably wants to be sexually intimate, you might go through that phase, but your mind really is not. I know I did have a girlfriend. We were talking about that, and her husband wanted to have sex, but she was concerned about the children need this. She have to pick them up after work. They didn't have a babysitter at the time, and he sort of got upset. It's like she's not into it, but she was there physically, but mentally her mind was going a million miles per hour because she was really focused on family matters, and that sort of created a little friction. So as you said, it's important to have conversation, discussion, and not because you probably married someone or you dated someone that every time that intimacy is supposed to happen, that it should happen. Because if you're not at that space physically, mentally, it probably just not gonna work out. So I think that's an important point that you raise here.
Yeah, and we do need to give each other grace, Lanadale. We don't give grace within our relationship, whatever relationship it is. We need to give grace and patience and understanding, and a safe space for people to talk about those things. Because if I come to speak about it and you're going to shout at me, or you're going to walk out, or not hear me and watch the TV while I'm trying to engage in a conversation with you, I will never come back, right?
Right. Absolutely.
So having those space to have those conversations with people.
Absolutely. Now, thank you so much, Colleen, for being here with me today as we talk about love, relationships, sex, and taboo. As mentioned in my introduction, this is an ongoing series where Ms. Charles is going to come back and have more discussion on a number of different topics. I mean, we mentioned a number of things here that can be topics or conversations by itself. So we would be following up with our series or topic about love, relationships, and sexual taboo. Thank you guys for tuning in to watching the Social Mind, or please subscribe to our Facebook page, The Social Mind, and follow me on YouTube, or subscribe to my YouTube channel at Ladyk Charles. And I would see you for another episode about sex, relationships, and taboo. Thank you again, Ms. Charles.
Thank you for having me.
You're welcome.